Joining us now for a closer look at the tax and spending bill making its way through the Senate is Marc Goldwein. He's the Senior Vice President and Senior Policy Director for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. Marc, thank you for joining us. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the scorekeepers have rolled in about a day ago with a new scoring of the Senate bill. What do you make of their math?
So CBO says this is going to add $4 trillion to the debt, actually $3.9 trillion, but who's counting? And by the way, that assumes a bunch of this stuff expires after 4 years, like we just cut taxes on tips and we bring it back. If you extend everything, that $4 trillion becomes almost $5.5 trillion.
And explain what you mean by if you extend everything, play out what that means for people.
Right. So in order to keep the cost at only $4 trillion, right, which is a massive amount, the bill has a bunch of policies that only go for 4 or 5 years. So no tax on tips, no tax for overtime, bigger standard deduction for seniors, higher defense spending. All of these things are temporary in the bill, but most people are going to support extending them. And extending them makes the bill even costlier, another $1.5 trillion onto the price tag.
So it's essentially a way to hide the long-term cost. And as an example of something that had a limited amount of tax cut time that then was extended when that deadline came up, what's our most primary example of that in front of us?
Well, we're living it right now because most of this bill is extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed in 2017, to keep those costs down. They had it expire at the end of 2025. Now Congress is extending it, and in fact, the Senate wants to not even account for those costs, pretend they're invisible. So they're going to play the exact same game again in 4 years' time.
Now, people might not have been listening a week ago when we talked about making it invisible, but just explain to people what that means in the accounting.
Yeah. So the appropriate way to measure something is how does this legislation change the law? But what Congress wants to do, the Senate in particular, is pretend the law has already changed. So they want to pretend that these $3.8 trillion of expiring tax cuts are already extended. And if you pretend they're already extended, of course, extending them is free because it's already happened. But again, this is just a massive budget gimmick to try to hide huge amounts of borrowing.
Let me ask you a larger theological question. There have been a number of instances in this legislation where the Senate and House have come up against efforts in the past by lawmakers who cared about fiscal responsibility to lock in behavior, whether it's the Byrd rule in the Senate, those expiring tax cuts, and other methods that have been used to try to make politicians in the moment do the right thing. How have those gone? How have the politicians behaved against those constraints?
Well, they are looking to loosen the shackles wherever they can. The House, to its credit, I think, is much better behaved than the Senate. Their bill added $3 trillion to the debt, which is a lot less than $4 trillion. They used that current law baseline. They did do some arbitrary expirations and count on some fantasy growth. So I wouldn't say they're totally pure, but they did better. But both the House and the Senate, especially the Senate, they're sort of at the point they're just going to do whatever they want. And they're trying to get rid of all of these fiscal constraints, despite many of these members spending years talking about how big a debt crisis we're headed towards.
And about 10 seconds left, the Treasury Secretary that said, no, this legislation makes a start in reducing the deficit. Your quick thought.
I mean, only if hitting rock bottom is the first step to recovery.